back. Okay, should world leaders try to promover, fomentar, to promote? Promote también es promocionar. To promote. Sales promotion. To promote brand image. To promote the brand. Promocionar la marca. To promote the brand. So to promote is an important verb. It can be translated basically in three ways. Promocionar, promover y fomentar. So to promote world peace is fomentar la paz mundial, o promover la paz mundial. To promote world peace. I don't think leaders are really necessarily interested in directly promoting world peace. They do it, or they go through the motions of doing it. To go through the motions means hacer como si lo hicieran, o sea, hacer los movimientos típicos de. To go through the motions. But they don't really. Es de boquilla, digamos, to pay lip service to the concept of world peace. I'm sure they want world peace, but sometimes they want to conquer or to gain hegemony or dominance over neighbors. The United States wants to maintain dominance over Mexico and Canada, of course. The United States is much bigger in population than both Canada and Mexico. Mexico is about 115 or 120 million people. Canada is only about 35 million. And the United States is 330 million. So the United States is 3 times bigger, almost, than Mexico. And it's almost, I would say, 9 times bigger or almost 10 times bigger than Canada in population. So it's an enormous country. It's the 3rd largest country in the world in population, after China and India. And the 4th is Indonesia. So it's an important country. And Donald Trump is interested in the benefit of the United States first. America first, he says. Make America great again. MAGA. Make America great again. But Vladimir Putin is the same, and the Chinese chairman is the same. And the Macron in France, even though he talks a lot about the European Union, his first responsibility is to look after the French economy, to look after the good of the French people. That's his first and foremost responsibility. So world leaders, should they try to promote world peace? Yes, they should. Do they promote world peace? Well, indirectly, they do, I think. I say indirectly. It's not necessarily their objective. But to do the opposite is not a very wise thing. Not to promote world peace, not to try to. If somebody decides to invade their neighbors, they're asking for it. Se lo están buscando. For example, Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler reached power in Germany in 1933. And he and his Nazi party consolidated their control of the German economy. The social, cultural, and economic aspects of Germany were under the control. By the end of 1934, the Nazi party was in control, totally, in Germany. And because of that, with no opposition, they instituted a lot of improvements, and things improved very, very quickly in Germany. The economy got better. Germany became stronger and things. But Adolf Hitler made some decisions that were destined to destroy Germany. He decided to take the Sudetenland. And the Sudetenland, well, the first thing he did in 1936 was to march into the Rhineland. Las Tierras del Rhin. You see, the Rhineland, after the First World War, was under the control. It was German land, but it was under the control of French and British troops. And he decided to go in and reoccupy German territory. It was German territory, but under a certain control. And he sent his troops in. He sent the German army into the Rhineland. And he reestablished the German control of German territory. But this was German territory originally, as well. before the First World War and after. And then he decided there was an important area of Czechoslovakia. At that time, after the First World War, Czechoslovakia was created. La República Checa junto con Eslovaquia. They're a bit different, these people, but this country was created, Czechoslovakia. And part of Czechoslovakia, an important part, was German-speaking. Most of the people living there, it was called the Sudetenland. Sudetenland. If you look at the Czech Republic, I'm going to open up a map. If you look at a map of Europe, let me pull out a map. If you look at a map of Europe, you will see that the Czech Republic is partially inside Germany. And let me pull it out. My computer is going a little bit slowly today. Let me pull it out. Let's see. Aquí. Vamos a arrastrar. Come on. It drives me crazy. Now, I think I have it. All right. Now, one more. Now, if you open up a map of Europe with the borders of every country, and look at Germany. Look at Munich in the south, and look at Leipzig and Dresden in towards the north, and Berlin. You will see there's an important part of the Czech Republic that is occupying what would seem a natural area in Germany. Praga, la capital, Prague, in fact, is at the very beginning of this area. Just to the west of Prague, you're in an area that seems it should be part of Germany. So the Czech Republic, an important part of the Czech Republic, enters and invades land that seems should be part of Germany. And after the First World War, before the Second World War, this area was predominantly German-speaking, the Sudetenland. I don't know how to say that in Spanish, the Sudetenland. This is a very important moment in 20th century history. Sudetenland. All right, Sudetenland. The Sudetenland is the historical German name for the northern, southern, and western areas of former Czechoslovakia, which were inhabited primarily by Sudeten Germans. These German speakers had predominated in the border districts of Bohemia, Moravia, and Czech Silesia from the time of the Austrian Empire, the Sudeten Germans. And so Adolf Hitler claimed that area for Germany. And he wanted that area for Germany. And in 1938, there was a summit meeting, Reunion Cumbre, in Munich, and the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, gave in to Hitler's demands. And the German army marched into the Sudetenland and took it. So basically, Germany was taking an important section of Czechoslovakia without war in 1938. And so Adolf Hitler was already starting to be belligerent and starting to think in terms of pan-Germanism and of conquest of other countries and peoples. And that was a terrible mistake, because if the Nazi Party had stayed in Germany and continued to control and to improve, they could have stayed in power for a long, long time. Autocratic rule, dictatorial rule, can last for a long time if the dictators don't make the mistake of invading other countries. For example, the generals in Argentina. You remember Jorge Videla, Macera, and Galtieri, and others. The junta, en inglés decimos junta, pronunciamos la J a lo inglés. The junta in Argentina that took control in the 1970s. Well, they made a mistake of invading the Falkland Islands of Malvinas. If they had not invaded the Falkland Islands and made a silly mistake, they could have lasted maybe another 10 years. They were not very popular in Argentina, the military junta, but that junta probably could have remained in power for quite a few more years if they hadn't made the stupid mistake of invading a British territory. Even though the arguments in favor of that territory being Argentinian they are very strong arguments, it doesn't matter. And history is full of successful dictators who decide to invade a neighbor, and they make these mistakes. And when you decide to invade a neighbor, you're no longer a successful dictator. You are a conqueror, and you need to be careful. You need to be careful. Napoleon Bonaparte, Napoleon, of course, when he took over in France, first the triumvirate, and then he took over around the year 1801. If he had stayed in France and not started invading everybody, he could have probably stayed in power in France for 30 years. But he decided to invade other countries, and so he lasted less than 15 years. And finally, they sent him off to an island in the middle of the Atlantic where he withered and died. Se marchitó y murió. He withered and died. Okay, so world leaders, do they promote world peace? Well, not directly. But some leaders have been good. Some leaders, when I say world leaders, I'm not necessarily referring to people who are in the chancelleries, people who are in power. I mean, Mahatma Gandhi was a world leader. And now who else could be? I mean, Rafa Nadal and Federer could be considered world leaders in the sense that they influence people. Great sports figures, Pelé, has a strong influence on people. Certain very, very popular people can have an influence. But still, the power resides in politicians, in power politics, and in economics and business, especially business. Who is more powerful? The political class or the business class? It's an interesting question. Don Dinero, de Francisco de Quevedo. Yes, potente o poderoso caballero es Don Dinero. However, when the chips are down, political power is stronger. You see that in Russia with Vladimir Putin. He has his power in the Kremlin was challenged by certain people in the ex-Soviet Union, certain people in Russia who had gained economic power, but big economic empires, and he destroyed them. Political power can destroy economic power because political power has access to the guns. Economic power usually doesn't have access to weaponry. Weaponry means armas. And usually don't. But economic power is very powerful, and entre bastidores, as you say, behind the scenes, economic power maybe ends up controlling the world. Who controls the world? I don't know. I don't think anybody does. You know, it's wonderful. A lot of people enjoy conspiracy theories, talking about the Illuminati or the Masones, the Masons, the Frankmasons or Freemasons, or the trilateral, the trilateral, or the Ernesto Sabato, the Argentinian author, writer. He wrote a novel called Sobre héroes sobre héroes y tumbas. Interesting book, by the way. And in that book, in that novel, it's big, it's long, it's 500 or 600 pages, it's a long novel. Los ciegos, the blind organizations, control the world. It's interesting. And in Ayn Rand, the Russian-American philosopher and of the objectivism and defender of free markets and capitalism, in her novels, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, these novels, the true power lied in the intelligent people working behind the scenes. And those were her heroes. Discreet, intelligent people working behind intervestidores to control the world. And it's interesting. If you've never read Ayn Rand, it's interesting. In Spain, very few people really know Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand. She was born in Russia in 1905. And she left Russia around 1926, 1927. So she lived through the Bolshevik Revolution and through the Leninist Russia and in the beginning of Stalinist Russia. But she got out. She left. And she was strongly, very strongly opposed to collectivism, collectivismo, collectivism and statism. Just the opposite. She was very much in favor of laissez-faire capitalism. Laissez-faire. Now, laissez-faire is a French word. Laissez-faire. Laisser is permitir. Faire is hacer. Permitir hacer. Capitalism. Laissez-faire capitalism means capitalismo, el capitalismo, sin trabas burocráticas, sin nada de trabas, cuanto más libre para hacer whatever they want. Individual rights, derechos individuales, including property rights. She promoted, Ayn Rand, it's interesting, romantic realism. Curiosa expresión. El realismo romántico. And, interesting woman. Ayn, A-Y-N, strange name. Rand, R-A-N-D. And she wrote, I haven't read The Fountainhead, and they made a movie out of The Fountainhead with Gary Cooper. But she wrote a long novel called Atlas Shrugged. In Spanish, it's called La Rebelión de Atlas. Interesting metaphor here, talking about Atlas. As you know, Atlas was one of the, what do you call them? He was one of the titans, titanes, de la mitología griega. One of the titans, which means he was a brother or an uncle. Creo que era tío de Zeus, el tío. He was one of, I think, Atlas. He was one of the uncles of Zeus in Greek mythology. And he was in charge of holding the world on his shoulders and on his back. He supported the world. If you remember, you can remember the images of a strong God, un Dios muy fuerte con la orbe mundial en sus hombros. That's Atlas. Atlas is un titán, a titan. And Atlas Shrugged means Atlas se encoge de hombros, se encogió de hombros, means dejó la orbe, caer libremente. He got tired of holding up the world. So it's a metaphor of responsibility. People who have responsibility and are not irresponsible. Ayn Rand, that was her book, Atlas Shrugged. I recommend it. I recommend it. Atlas Shrugged is a book that has had an enormous impact on thinking, especially in the United States and Canada, over the past 60 years, this novel. More than most other novels. If you have to, what are the 10 novels that have had the greatest influence in history? Of course, one of them is Don Quixote de la Mancha. But I would almost include Atlas Shrugged. the most influential novels of all time. That's an interesting question to ask. For me, Dostoevsky and their Hermanos Karamazov, the Hermanos Karamazov, we say in English. But there are quite a few. Of course, Tolstoy with War and Peace. But I would include Ayn Rand here. The 10 most influential novels of all time. Don Quixote is included. 12 novels considered the greatest books ever written. Ana Karenina, I haven't read it. To Kill a Mockingbird, yes. Matar un ruiseñor, se dice aquí. To Kill The Great Gatsby, no, I don't like it. 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I don't know if I would include it in the top 10. Influential. This is influential. E.M. Forster with A Passage to India. Invisible Man, yes. By Ralph Ellison Wells. There are 2 novels. One is called The Invisible Man, El Hombre Invisible, and that was a novel written by H.G. Wells, the English scientist and writer and journalist. But there's another novel called Invisible Man, quitando the delante, and that's by Ralph Ellison, a black man. It was published in the late 40s or the early 50s. I read it. It's an incredible novel. 1952 it was published. And I can't explain it to you, but parts of the book take place in the American Deep South and parts of it in Manhattan, in New York City. It's quite an interesting book, Invisible Man. Don Quixote de la Mancha. And then Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I don't agree with some of these books, but in any case, for me, Ayn Rand with Atlas Shrugged is one of the most important novels. From the point of view of influencing people read that book and they change. That a novel that changes your life. You say there's a before and an after, un antes y un después, a watershed in your life, a turning point in your life. Curiosa expresión, watershed. A watershed in your life. Watershed. Strange word. Water como agua, shed como cobertizo. A watershed in somebody's life. It's a moment, it's a turning point, an event that is important because it represents a big change in how people do or think about something. It was a watershed. It was a turning point. There was, you say in Spanish, había un antes o hay un, habido un antes y un después in this. For example, for me, the creation of Vaughan Radio was a watershed in the history of Vaughan Systems. The creation of Vaughan was also a watershed. A turning point, a before and an after. And Ayn Rand's novel, Atlas Shrugged, for a certain segment of the population, it's a turning point in their life. Not in mine. It was simply a reconfirmation of my basically my philosophy of laissez-faire capitalism as well. What you would call it, in European terms, liberal, economic liberalism. Because liberal in Europe has a different meaning from political liberal in the United States. And so, but it's an interesting book. However, because Ayn Rand is a philosopher, when you read the book, you can see the philosophy personified in the characters, which means her characters, sus personajes, are personifications of certain philosophies. And so it's not quite natural. You see that in Miguel de Unamuno. If you read Unamuno, Abel Sanchez. Abel Sanchez is